Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 2 results. So we've had an action-packed week in Philadelphia where we've seen for the first time the Florida Mayhem, the Houston Outlaws, the Washington Justice and the Philadelphia Fusion in action. And it's given us our first indication of where these teams might be fighting it out in the league right now and how good they are and how perhaps not so good they are. So let's take a look at what happened at the Battle of Brotherly Love this week. Remember, there's only 4 fixtures because of the cancellation of the Chinese homestands. This week, I believe, was meant to be Shanghai, and those will be played over week 6 and 7, with some of them moved to the Seoul Dynasty homestand on week 5 as well. So we kicked off then on Saturday with the Florida Mayhem taking on the Houston Outlaws. The Florida Mayhem are retooled slightly for this new season. Obviously, they brought in Carrion and Gargoyle, along with some others near the end of last season. They didn't get too much time to prove themselves. But then we saw the additions of Yaki and Gangnam Jin from Runaway, along with Kuki the coach. And Florida could honestly be a surprise package this season. They look fairly good. And they showed their prowess against a very underwhelming Houston Outlaws team here, where they won 3-0. So this game was a real teller. Not necessarily for the Florida Mayhem, but more for the Houston Outlaws. So, the Houston Outlaws, not good. Like, not good. They were running Brigitte Lucio for the first part of this match. And a lot of people were just saying, why? Brigitte does have a use case actually at the moment, in certain circumstances, but Brigitte Lucio, yeah, that's a weird champ, I think is the best way to describe that. But Houston Outlaws, as I said during the power rankings and stuff like that, this team looks very disjointed. It doesn't look on the same page. We saw glimmers of great play from Jexe and Meko at times, with Repel as well, and also Hydration on the May as well. Actually, it was pretty decent at times. But there are a lot of miscommunications with the Houston Outlaws. A lot of the times where Meko perhaps wasn't on the same page as some of the other players. Hydration. There was a lot of lost ults as well. Although we did see Meko pick up a lot of ult eats on the enemy Maze during both games of this weekend. It's not a good look for the Houston Outlaws right now. There's no sugarcoating it. It's not good, and we will get onto the Washington Justice game in a minute, but for the Houston Outlaws, it's looking rough. Florida Mayhem, though, exactly the way you want to start your season. Florida Mayhem, I honestly think we will go over the result against Philadelphia Fusion in a minute as well. It's a very up and down week for Florida Mayhem, but a lot of promising signs, and definitely looking like a team that is not going to be rooted to the bottom like they have been for the past 2 seasons, which is great. It's nice to see progress at a team that has not really seen much light at the end of the tunnel in the past 2 seasons. Moving on then, and we had the Washington Justice in action against the home team, the Philadelphia Fusion. Now, Washington Justice are kind of a team that's almost Marmite in the power rankings. Some people have got them down the bottom of the league, or near the bottom of the league. Some people are picking them to do very well. So this was a big teller for the Washington Justice on whether they could actually keep up with the big boys, because the Philadelphia Fusion are regarded as one of the big boys of this season. Now, Washington Justice actually look pretty good here. They do lose 3-1, however, to the Philadelphia Fusion. It's the only game where we see both teams in the match take a map off of each other. So, yeah, you can guess that the others are 3-0s. It's a very one-sided weekend for a lot of teams, but Washington Justice do go toe-to-toe with the Philadelphia Fusion here. And it's an interesting look for the Washington Justice, and it's a great weekend because you can compare the Washington Justice and the Florida Mayhem, arguably your 2 worst teams from last season if you exclude the Boston Uprising, and it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. It's obviously very early days, this is only week 2, but there are some takeaways for a lot of teams in this week, apart from the Houston Outlaws. I'm sorry, the Houston Outlaws, it's been an awful week. They've got their homestand coming up in week 4, I think, as well, so they need to turn things around, Houston Outlaws, otherwise it's going to be a very awful start to the season, but I think they're a team that will develop. Anyway, back to Washington Justice and the Philadelphia Fusion. Philadelphia Fusion, great news for them is that Carpe, on point. really on point. We've seen the Carpe Symmetra as well. McCree, Widow, he looks good. And we had another Carpe moment. I can't remember, I think it was in either this match or the Florida Mayhem match, where he just carried. He carried them to a fight win. And that's what Carpe used to do. He didn't do it last season, but in Season 1, in the inaugural season, Carpe, that was what he was known for. And it looks like we're getting that Carpe again. Just like Birdring with the LA Gladiators now. It seems like these players are coming back. And really, that's something you could anticipate, considering that this new meta, now we're out of double barrier, really enables DPS. It really enables DPS to carry at times. And we are seeing that at times. We've seen it from the Washington Justice this weekend as well, with Corey and Stratus at times as well, where they just carried the team. Because, yes, the tank line of the Washington Justice has seemed decent. Raw is... There's stuff to be worked on with Raw. Elivote had his ups and downs. The support line was fairly stable for the Washington Justice, but it was definitely the DPS, as we expect with the Washington Justice, that were really, really carrying fights at times. Corey and Stratus are fantastic, and they're really gonna put Washington Justice in a place where they can compete with the best, but I don't think they're going to be right up there. That's what I'm taking away from this. Philadelphia Fusion, though, on track. Exactly what they needed. Yes, they would have liked the 3-0, but I don't think that's realistic against the Washington Justice. Philadelphia Fusion wanted a good win to start off their campaign, and they got that against the Justice. So we move on to day 2 then, where we saw the Justice in action again against the Houston Outlaws this time though. So I said this was a weekend where we could really compare the Washington Justice and the Florida Mayhem, because they'd be taking on the same opponents during the weekend. So, again, there's really... What can we say about the Houston Outlaws? Can we change their name to the Houston OUTLULS? Maybe? It was a bad weekend. It was a 3-0 for the Justice once again. Houston Outlaws are the first team this season to not pick up a single map in their first 2 games. It roots them at the bottom of the league under the London Spitfire. And there's, very little to say about the Houston Outlaws right now. There's a lot of team bonding to do. There's a lot of work in the back room and the coaches to get this team on the same page. There are glimmers of really good play, especially, obviously from Meko, but from other players on the team as well. But it just didn't come together. And this is sometimes what we will say. They are a team of individuals. They are not a team. They are a bunch of individuals. And that doesn't make a team. This bunch of individuals needs to be worked together so that they can play as a team. If that happens, this Houston Outlaws team will develop into a fairly decent team. And that might happen as the season goes on, but at the moment, it's looking real dire. Washington Justice, this is exactly what we needed from the Washington Justice here. When we saw what happened with the Florida Mayhem and Houston Outlaws match the previous day, and what we saw with Washington taking on Philadelphia, we expected the Justice to get a 3-0 over the Outlaws, and they got the job done. This is something that the Justice need to do throughout the season, and it'll be very interesting when we get to see the Florida Mayhem take on the Justice, because I think they're 2 very evenly matched teams right now, but they were last season. But the thing is here, they're 2 evenly matched teams at a different point in the league than they were at last season. I think this is 2 at least mid-table teams here. I think these teams have really got a chance of play-ins at least. And if they develop as the season goes on, they could be playoff contenders. They could be. But there's a lot of ups and downs during this season, so it's very hard to tell at this early stage. But a 3-0 for the Washington Justice is exactly what we'd expect from them against the Outlaws right now. There are not a lot of teams I would expect to be losing to the Houston Outlaws right now. So, yeah. It's going to be a tough time for the Outlaws early on in this season, but hopefully as the season goes on, they will develop and get that synergy working, because they have the potential there. Then we had the last game of the weekend, and it was the Florida Mayhem taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. Now, I actually thought, considering the performance of Florida Mayhem against the Outlaws, and considering the performance of the Fusion against the Justice, I thought this would be a pretty close match. And in some respects it was. Some of the maps went pretty close. But the Philadelphia Fusion have this quality about them right now that seems to get them the wins on maps. That clutchness that the Washington Justice and the Florida Mayhem have lacked during this weekend. Philadelphia Fusion get a 3-0 win over the Florida Mayhem. Now, it's been an up and down weekend for the Florida Mayhem. I think there is great potential in this team. That's without a doubt. And I think this team will develop as the season goes on. This is definitely a team that can beat the likes of the Spitfire. Obviously, they've beaten the Outlaws. They can beat the Boston Uprising. They can go toe-to-toe with the Paris Eternal if they can shut down XZ and people like that. I think this is a team that really has a chance of getting play-ins at least this season. Definitely improving on what they've been in the past 2 seasons. I think that's a given considering their performance this weekend. And they did go toe-to-toe with the Fusion, even though the scoreline doesn't really suggest so. Fusion, though, they're top of the league. And that's with New York and Vancouver having played 2 games as well. So, yeah, they're definitely up there. As we predicted, they are looking like a playoff team in these early stages. Again, it's a long, long season. And we won't know the pure pedigree of the Philadelphia Fusion until they go up against the really big boys. When we see the Philadelphia Fusion take on the likes of New York, when we see them take on the likes of Vancouver, the likes of San Francisco. And the great thing is that next week we get to see the Philadelphia Fusion take on the New York Excelsior in Washington. So this is going to be an epic game to start off next week. It really, really is. And it'll be the first real teller, right, of the top teams, where they rank. Because New York have looked very good, Philadelphia have looked very good, but they've been against teams that they should be beating. This is a game where either one could take the crown, and it will tell us where they stand. If I was a betting person, I think New York Excelsior might just go out ahead of the Philadelphia Fusion, but who knows? And the interesting thing about this weekend with the Philadelphia Fusion as well is that in both games against the Washington Justice and the Florida Mayhem, they fielded Poco instead of Fury. I'm rather surprised about that. I'm not going to lie. Maybe that was a play to the Philadelphia Fusion crowd, because obviously Poco has been at Philadelphia Fusion since the start, whereas Fury is a new incomer for this season. I still think Fury is a better pick in this meta. Considering this meta is the off-tank is normally playing either D.Va or Orisa, that is just Fury. That is literally Fury. We saw him play Orisa at a really good standard for London last season. So, yeah, I think it's interesting that they went with Poco. It worked though, so I really can't question it. But that's something I'll be keeping an eye on in future, because if Fury continues to be benched by the Philadelphia Fusion, I said this at the start of the season, I don't see both of them staying there. Because they're 2 phenomenally good off-tanks that both could be starting for top teams in the league. So it's going to be very hard to keep both of them happy. And name another team in the league that has 2 phenomenal off-tanks on their roster that can compete head-to-head like that. Proven off-tanks. I don't think you can. New York Excelsior, they've got Hotbar, but Bianca's not proven at the OWL. So this is a really interesting time for the Philadelphia Fusion. I'll be very interested over the next few weeks to see how they iron that out. But let's round up this video by taking a look at the standings, because we haven't done that yet. I didn't do it last week because basically it's the first week. You can kind of gather what the standings are. But joint top of our league, Philadelphia Fusion and the New York Excelsior. Coming in at 3rd, we have the Vancouver Titans. 4th, we have the Toronto Defiant and the San Francisco Shock, but they've only played 1 game this season so far. So, yeah, work that out, but San Francisco Shock aren't going to be in action for another couple of weeks yet anyway. Paris Eternal are joint 6th with the Washington Justice, having that 1-1 record but that +1 differential. Then we have the Florida Mayhem in 8th with that 1-1 record but a 0 differential, and then the Valiant in 9th with that -1 differential but that 1-1 record. Obviously, everyone joint 10th, so that's Seoul, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Atlanta, Hangzhou, Chengdu. They all haven't played yet, so they're all basically 0. And then we have the teams that obviously are on the losers. So, Los Angeles Gladiators have only played 1 game. They lost that game narrowly to the Vancouver Titans, so I wouldn't expect the Gladiators to stick around there, especially with the quality they showed against the Titans. And Boston Uprising, again, they've only played 1 game, but this is a team that got 3-0'd by New York fairly comprehensively. I expect Boston to be around where Houston are at some point. Dallas Fuel, 0-2, -4 differential. What can you say about Dallas Fuel last week? You know, London Spitfire in 19th with that -5 differential. London, it was disappointing against Paris last week, but they have an opportunity to turn it around next week, but they'll be playing the homeboys Washington Justice, so... difficult start for London Spitfire, and Houston Outlaws propping up League without a map on the board yet in 2 games. Yeah, nothing much to say about Houston right now. A lot of changes need to be made there in the back room. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.